Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Svarim Chatter podcast. On this episode of the podcast, I'm going to be joined by Elie Rosenfeld, who is the CEO of Joseph Jacobs Advertising, which is the agency that partners with Maxwell House to target the Jewish community, and especially they are famous for the Maxwell House Haggadah, which is what we will be discussing. And disclaimer, Elie is also my uncle as well. So thank you, Elie, for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you, Nachi, for having me.
Okay, so let's start off. Tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your background.
So I'll start with myself a bit and our agency. I've been with Joseph Jacobs since 1996. I got there working on accounts, doing what advertising agencies do. And in 2003, I bought the firm from the founder's son, a gentleman named Dick Jacobs. Our firm was founded in 1919 by a guy named Joe Jacobs, oddly enough. Joseph Jacobs Advertising would say that. Joe created this agency so that brands and products and services were able to target the then extremely large but still growing Jewish community on the Lower East Side of New York. And he ran advertising in primarily then Yiddish newspapers in the Lower East Side, Yiddish daily papers, the Forward, Der Woch, Der Blatt, Der Yid, the Morning Journal, all of the Yiddish dailies that really served the growing Jewish community on the Lower East Side. He would place ads in them. He turned it from just placing ads to an agency by assisting people in getting the ads translated into Yiddish. When it was a food product, he would actually, when appropriate, connect them with a Rav to get them a hashgacha. Products that needed or didn't need a hashgacha. And that sort of segues into Maxwell House. Maxwell House was coffee, didn't particularly need a hashgacha. But at that time, he connected them with a Rav to remind people that coffee was not kitnios. There was a confusion. There was a misunderstanding that coffee beans were beans, kitnios, and they're not. It's a berry, it's a fruit. We can get into the botany some other day. But Joe knew that. He himself wasn't from. He was an old, Yekisha traditional Jew, but not Shomer Shabbos. But he knew that was the case, and he contracted them with a Rav. And the original ad that ran back in 1923 was interesting because it said "Mitzvah Aleinu Lasaper." It's a mitzvah for us to tell you. And if you look in today's Haggadah, it's in the back, a copy of that ad from the Forward from 1923, and that's the very quick history of Joseph Jacobs.
Okay, and how did you get involved with this?
As I said, I got there in 1996, and the firm at that point wasn't actually, Dick wasn't Shomer Shabbos, and other people in the firm were not. And it was at a time where the Haggadah hadn't been updated in any meaningful way since the 60s. So in 1997, 1998, we undertook to redo the Haggadah because they felt they had someone in the agency that was able to manage the project. And we did that. We updated the Haggadah in 1998 for the first time since the mid-60s. At that point, though, we updated the typesetting, we updated the graphics, we updated the cover. We introduced at that point a color cover, so it looks much more modern. And that became the standard bearer for the next 10 or 12 years or so. So it was a project that I got intimately involved with early on because I was the one that had the knowledge base and had the understanding of what the market needed and was able to handle it internally at the firm.
Okay, so we'll talk more about the newest edition later on, but let's start with the Haggadah. So you mentioned Maxwell House gets involved with Joseph Jacobs and the agency, but that was in 1923, the first ad. The Haggadah doesn't start till 1932. So what goes on in the interim, and how does this idea for starting a Haggadah come to be?
Well, as I had mentioned, there was that question that whether or not coffee beans were actually kitnios. And at that point, the way I was always told this story by Dick, it was that retailers and grocers on the Lower East Side would put away coffee beans when they set their store up for Pesach. Coffee then, for the most part, Maxwell House was a canned product as we see it today, but a lot of loose beans were sold. This is gross, think about being in a grocery store in the 1920s. So the big bins of loose coffee that we have like a scooper and you could buy it by the pound, the grocer would put it away because they were kitnios and they weren't for Pesach. So Maxwell House saw this and Joe Jacobs saw this and they said, well, what's the story? So as I said, Joe put them together with a Rav who gave him a hashgacha, who told people they're not kitnios. In order to reinforce that, what do? This is marketing 101. You do something that really connects to the product. You give something away that is so intertwined, so connected with whatever you're trying to sell. And in that case, you're trying to sell Pesach. You give away a Haggadah. To be sure, they were not the first person to give away a Haggadah. They certainly were not the last ones to give away a Haggadah. But this Haggadah, for a variety of reasons, which we could discuss, just stood the test of time. Some of it just being the wherewithal to continue doing it. So many of the Haggadot that were out there, the companies have disappeared. So if the companies disappeared, the Haggadah disappeared. Some of them, the companies not be there, but they were sold, or their budgets dried up, or all these various things happened that there wasn't this real inertia to keep it going. So it didn't keep going, and it dried up. On the flip side, Maxwell House, through all of its ownerships and transitions and brand teams and budgets and wars and inflation and deflation, the brand always continued and found that this was an integral part of their DNA. And I actually was at the brand just a few days ago, doing something that we find so interesting, because the brand is now owned by Kraft Heinz, the same folks that make Heinz ketchup and the same people that make variety of non-kosher items that we don't pick up, maybe Kraft mac and cheese and Velveeta. The team celebrates this as such a part of their heritage that once a year, for the last 2 years, last year I did it virtually, the year before it was canceled, I do a model Seder with the team that runs the Maxwell House coffee business. And they're amazed. I bring out matzah and shmura matzah. I bring fresh ground horseradish from Mara. And we go through what the Seder is about and explain why this brand is so tied to the Jewish community and what the Seder itself means to a family and what it means to the greater world and what the holiday of Pesach is all about. So they feel that they really understand what this is. But getting back to your original question, it just stood the test of time. They were willing to continue to do it and found it to be a useful tool for marketing and sales. And at this point, it is a useful connection with the community.
Right, so that's something I was going to say. Now it already turned into almost its own brand. Like the Maxwell House Haggadah, we can mention this later. I know, when President Obama was president, he used it. I don't know if other presidents have it. He's famous that he used it by the White House Seder there. So. Right. I know it's kind of become its own brand, and I guess at this point they just keep. You can talk this. They keep it up just for that, but that's interesting. So,
but to a certain extent, that it certainly is that it's become part. As I said, it is its own brand, but they're certainly not in the business of Haggadahs. But oddly enough, this makes Maxwell House the largest Judaica publisher in America. We're talking about printing this year close to 500,000 Haggadahs. There were years we were printing in the neighborhood of 1 million. So you pick a Judaica publisher in the United States. No one is printing altogether 500,000 books a year, let alone a coffee company that gives them away for free.
Well, that's another thing that I wanted to ask you. I guess we can get to today. I want to pull back for the history for a second. Were they sold right away when they started making it, or were they given out when you buy the coffee? How did
they have never been sold? It's not a product to sell. It's a marketing tool. It's a giveaway. In theory, it is buy a can of coffee, a jar of coffee, and take a Haggadah. It's a free with purchase kind of deal. And it still does say that, by the way. If you go many stores that have them, they come in this nice shipper with a sign, and it says free with purchase. We're certainly aware and sort of happy to say that we can appreciate people don't have a Seder for one. Chalila, God forbid, someone should be sitting there by themselves at a Seder table. It says it. And as I said, I just did my model Seder with them a few days ago. And I'm very careful to, pick and choose what I explain to this team. But I, without a doubt, every year go through Halach Ma'anya and explain Kol Dech V'Yetze V'Echel. This is not a time to be alone. So they understand that people take more than one Haggadah. It's always been given away for free. They certainly would appreciate if people buy the coffee. They are doing a very nice service for the Jewish community. And yes, it is designed to sell coffee. It is designed to help get coffee into supermarkets because the supermarkets like to give them away. You go into a ShopRite if you're in the Northeast. You go into a Publix. You go into a Vons or a Winn-Dixie or a Jewel around the country or Kroger's. They're going to have it. They don't have to pay for those Haggadahs either. They get them from Maxwell House and they give them to the consumers. So there's an entire sort of daisy chain here of everybody getting their hands on it and everybody taking some portion of, I wouldn't say responsibility, but some portion of the benefit that the consumers are getting out of it.
So you mentioned how it just became famous and grew into this brand, but was there anything unique about it, or was it just the fact that it was this Hebrew-English Haggadah? And was that alone interesting? I know you mentioned, that's going to be a big question, but you mentioned other brands did it. And, I'll throw out a name, Manischewitz. I know there have been others you can talk about. So, but I know you said they stuck with it. So, okay, I understand that. But was there anything to their Haggadah, or was it just, like you said, everyone else was doing it, just they stuck with it?
I think it was much of it they stuck with it, and also because they were a very large national brand. So most of the other brands that did them over time were a Manischewitz, they were a Barton's, they were, there were other coffee companies even that didn't have the ability to get the Haggadahs to the vast corners of the United States. So, as I said, we live in, the Northeast. You go into a ShopRite, but if you go to Jewel in the Midwest in Chicago, they're going to have them there. If you go to a Kroger's in Cleveland or Cincinnati, you're going to have them there. If you go to an H-E-B in Texas, if you're a brand that is large enough, and as Maxwell House grew and was purchased by various companies and all sorts of mergers and acquisitions over the decades, it was something that allowed Jews across the country to get their hands on it. And where smaller brands didn't even have, even the ones that may have stuck with a little longer with it, didn't have that ability to continue to get that distribution model working.
Now, do you happen to know whose idea was the Haggadah? I mean, you said that Joseph Jacobs went with them, but was it his idea? Did he pitch them on, let's do a Haggadah with the
my understanding has always been is that Joe went to them and said, this is a way to market Pesach. If you give something that is so intrinsic, and then think about it from a marketing perspective, if you can give something to someone, to a consumer, that fulfills a need, you need a Haggadah at the Seder, and gets your brand to physically be in the hands of every participant of this event, what better marketing can you be?
Right. I think that's also it's just a simple, basic text of the Haggadah with the English translation. I know now you have Art Scroll and other ones, but it's the fact that you just could use.
So that to me is the beauty of the Maxwell's Haggadah. To be sure, and this is firm chatter. So you have had authors and Mechaber Sfarim, all types of people that can sit and probably sit at their Seder stacked high with Haggadahs. You can have a Haggadah that delves into this Pirush and that Pirush, and this angle of politics, if you want to go a little more liberal, and this angle, and you can have stuff that's, on Kabbalah. It's all in there. Hundreds and hundreds of Haggadahs, thousands upon thousands of pages. But guess what? Then you have to find your audience. You're always going to have an audience for simple. You're always going to have an audience for the simplicity. And the fact that this doesn't have a commentary. Oh, I disagree with this comment. I don't like what he wrote. I don't like what she wrote. It's not there. This is straight up. It's not even shot. It's just straight translation. It's the original text of the Haggadah. And then it's an English translation. It tells you what to do. It is exactly, to an extent, in my mind, what the Seder was designed for. You start at the beginning, we all sing it, Kadesh or Chatzachat. It does what the Seder is supposed to do. Kol Hamarba, great. That's fantastic. But for people either that don't want that, don't have the capacity for it, or guess what? At my Seder, I do sit with a Maxwell House. Yes, they are a phenomenal client and a great partner, but I also have other Svarim. I have people to Seder that are giving other Divrei Torah, but you sometimes want to know it is simple enough. I've used lots of other Haggadahs, and I use one or two at the Seder, but you're turning the page every 10 seconds because there's a line or two of Haggadah, and the entire page is all Mefarshim. That's fantastic. But if you're actually trying to get through Magid, you don't want to turn the page every 10 seconds. There's a functionality to this that really works from true Shomrei Shabbos, real, to more secular families that sit around and have a traditional Seder, which we hope that everybody sits and does. And this book really serves that purpose from left to right. Very few things in Judaism and Yiddishkeit really fit that bill.
So I've obviously been with you by a bunch of for
You have.
my Sdarim over the years. I don't remember. I guess you do use it. Speaking of that, I mean, I myself, I have plenty of Haggadahs to Seder. I try to use one. I don't use this, but I try to use something that has a small pirush. Exactly, because you don't want to turn a million pages while you're trying to find. You have to say the text of Haggadah, and it's like you're turning and turning. So I guess people like that. Now let's talk about the translation, the original archaic translation. So who did that translation?
So it's interesting. I never really knew this. I'd say, though, back in the fall this year, a gentleman named Avram Rus from Eretz Israel, reached out to me that he was doing research because he had some understanding as to who he's writing a PhD, and he's trying to figure out who wrote the original translation. And he called to see if I knew. And I had no idea because I was told this is the translation from 32. And that was that. He actually did a little bit of work, and he actually came up with a name of a gentleman named Mr. Hausdorff, Hausdorff, Hausdorff. So there seems to have been a family or two that says it was a great uncle or a grandparent, and they knew that guy did the Haggadah. There was no real proof, but this gentleman, Rus, he did an interesting thing, and I'm going to read you a text that he sent me. He digitized several of the later works from Hausdorff and used an authorship authentication software to compare the known work from him with the translation of the Maxwell's Haggadah. This was a long shot, but for technical reasons, he didn't go into it. It did not give a definitive outcome. But then he did further research and found that he is very comfortable to say, and again, I don't have records to go back this for, that Hausdorff worked for Joseph Jacobs back in the 20s, 30s. So if Hausdorff worked for us in that period of time, and there was a family that is claiming that their grandfather did this work, and this digitized software analysis says that it can't disprove that it's the same author, we're coming to a conclusion that we think this gentleman Hausdorff did the work. That translation pretty much lasted from 1932 till 2011, and it. To be sure, it was a fine translation, but I always I likened it to iambic pentameter or something. It was very old and archaic. It was if you picked up I hate to say it, maybe an old Birnbaum sitter kind of thing, or probably a little bit worse. So that worked. And again, I speak to people about this Haggadah almost year round, oddly enough, and people of all stripes and colors. And there's always those families that say, oh, they love the archaic because, there are families that have a minhag or a custom that they have different people read out loud different parts. And of course, certain families do it in English. Either they do the whole thing in English or they split it up. And they love to make fun of it. They love to have it to kibitz around about the crazy translation. But it was always sort of the butt of a joke instead of it actually being something a little bit more serious. So that's what we understand. That this gentleman Hausdorff seemed to have done that translation in 1932, or in the early 30s, and was used in the original 32 edition, and that was the standard bearer for what we used really up until 2011.
So do you have some examples of this? I mean, people may be familiar, or maybe if they're not familiar, just like what do you mean by archaic? What are some examples of old?
Let's open it up. You can't see me, but I'm holding the 1933 Haggadah. So this is original before they might have done, let's even, hold on a second. Just let me open some pages here. I'll even go from the simplicity of any of the brachos, any of the blessings here. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, right? So what is it? Blessed art thou, O eternal. So we do have in some places here, O eternal, but blessed are you instead of art thou. It's very, there are aspects of it that, we were able to get rid of. We do have O eternal in a couple places because there are places we didn't take it and make it into a modern translation. But let's take a look here. What else? Okay, I'm looking here at the beginning. I opened it up to Havdalah just because it's here. Thou didst, D-I-D-S-T, also discriminate between the sanctity of the Sabbath day and the sacredness of the festival, and didst consecrate the seventh day in preference for the 6 working days. Thou didst also separate thy people Israel, and didst sanctify them with thy holiness.
Wow. And this is the
compared to,
translation. And this is the translation until 2011. This is the translation.
this was there in 2011. And now you have also distinguished between the sanctity of the Sabbath day and the sacredness of the festival, and you have consecrated the seventh day in preference to the 6 working days. You have also distinguished your people. Again, we left it in a more respected liturgy kind of sound, I would say. We didn't want this to come off like, as I said, a modern novel. But at the very same time, we wanted a balance. And as I said, we updated translation. We didn't retranslate from scratch. So we really did that in a way that makes it more palatable, both for people that are accustomed to using English and Hebrew translations that might daven every day, etc., or to families that are going to gather around just for Pesach.
Yeah, just quickly before we go, I just want to pull you back to that old translation. What about like Manashtana or Baruch Hamakim? Arabanim. What do they translate over there? And then we'll talk about the new translation. You can contrast.
Okay, so let's go to Manashtana for a second. Give me a minute. Gonna go. So here we go. So we have. Very simple. Manashtana, we all know this. It's used in every headline and every Pesach you've ever seen. Why is this night different? You see, back in 1932, wherefore is this night distinguished from all other nights? Now, you think about it. Chaim and Sarah are going to get up on the chair and start singing Manashtana in English, and they're going to start saying, wherefore is this night distinguished from all other nights? It's just not going to, it wasn't working. So the current version is, why is this night different from all other nights? Yeah, we could sit here and darshan, is that exactly what it means? But then again, we're getting into whether or not we need Perish on a Haggadah. But the straight up translation that everybody is accustomed to and children should be comfortable being able to say in English or in Hebrew is, why is this night different?
Right, like I have the newer translation in front of me, like you mentioned earlier. Like I see here, bracha is blessed are you, our God, monarch of the universe. Okay, Bari Pregofen, creator of the fruit of the vine. Okay, maybe that seems a bit interesting, even the new one. But
Bore, creator, Pri Hagofen, yep. Creator, because you say it. We translated it in a way that was literal, but more comfortable. And you said something there. I don't know if you want to get into. Where do you want to get into on the modern translation?
Go ahead. You can talk about that. Let's talk about the modern translation now that we talked already about the archaic, and there's much more to talk about there. But before we get to that, I want to say, so this old translation, that's the old one. Someone would have to buy on eBay or something an old Haggadah. You can't. If
you want to get the old Haggadahs, people do call us. I need one from 1987 to match up my set. Believe me, that happens more often than you think. The only place to get old Haggadahs today is primarily to go to eBay. And in fact, a good part of my collection that I have, and I have them all, or I don't have every year. I have from every edition, every time there was a cover change, things like that. I have them, and I bought them on eBay, and that's really your best bet.
Okay.
That's the one of the places to get them. So in 2011, when we redid the Haggadah for what the current version is, with a minor changes this year, is that what we ended up doing is we updated, as I said, the translation. We also changed the layout. Historically, English and Hebrew were in opposing columns on the same page. We turned it to the more modern use where it's on opposing pages. So we updated it, as I said, and as we just went through. But one of the other things we did, and this gets into interesting conversations, of course, from a hashkafic perspective, but we gender neutralized the language in English. And it got everybody's radar. Everybody's antennas were up, and I got phone calls but then I said to everybody that I spoke to, I said, first of all, read it. Take a read and come back to me and tell me if you have trouble with it from a hashkafic and a halachic perspective that we retranslated and went gender neutral. No one called back because we weren't going to go he, she, and we translated it, even if it might not have been literal, in a way that just took away the concerns. Because obviously, Hebrew is a gender specific language. And that's just the way the language is. French is like that. Spanish is like that. Others are like that. So when you translate something, certainly when it was translated originally in the 20s and the 30s or earlier, it was going to be translated literally. And it was going to be translated whenever something is in a plural or in an unknown format. The way to write it in Hebrew is in the male form. Again, other languages just the same. So the translation always went male. if you rewrite the English to avoid that problem, you rewrite the English to avoid that problem. The one biggest question, and Nachi, you mentioned it when you were going through the Bar Pregafen there, was a very big challenge. And we actually believe we hit it head on. And not only did we hit it head on, and we really solved the problem, I truthfully believe that we actually did a more accurate job. What do you do for a word that comes across in the Haggadah many times? Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech ha'olam. Melech is definitive a king versus a queen. And again, what do you do there? We translated it with monarch. It's an accurate, correct, appropriate translation. And in my mind, the way I understood it, and I spoke to some people when we were doing this work, it actually does a better job than writing king. Because the Rambam actually says that we're not supposed to ascribe gender to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God doesn't have a gender. But why do we write God in Melech? Why do we talk about God with Etzba or Kim? Because in order for humans to understand what God and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is all about, we need to ascribe some understanding of something that we can understand. Melech, of course, is the big word you could think of, especially when things were written, when kings had that type of power, over people's lives in hundreds and thousands of years ago. The word Melech was Melech. But the truth is this: HaKadosh Baruch Hu isn't the Melech. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is beyond the Melech, beyond a monarch. But it was a more appropriate way of actually going after the Rambam that says you shouldn't actually choose gender. So, as I said, when people would call me after, we still, every couple of years, someone calls when they read an article about it online. And I give them this exact same conversation. I said, you read the translation and come back and tell me if there was something inappropriate from that perspective, if it's not even more accurate. And as I said, I've never received another call from any of those people because we really took it to heart to make sure that it was accurate. And we also wanted to make sure that it was something that would really connect with everybody that picked it up. And we really do believe that this Haggadah has a purpose from fully Shomer Shabbos, families that sit and use it at their Seder, to very secular families that this is their, couple time a year ritual gathering, and they get together for Pesach, and that's phenomenal. We, as I said before, we hope that many more people do. We wanted them to really be able to feel that they could accept this and use this Haggadah the same.
So was this gender neutral, like you said, monarch, so to speak? Was that something that was a Maxwell House directive, or that was something that you decided on your own?
When we did the work, they didn't give us many directives. We had told them and we discussed with them we wanted to update the look and the feel. And we felt it was also time, and we presented to them that we were going to update the translation. And I also came and said, I think we should go this route, because there are always murmurings. I've spoken to many people over the years about this Haggadah from every corner. Everybody loves it. Let's just start there. I've never got complaints. People have called me up and wanted me to add, hey, you should do this. It's a great piece to Kirov. You should add midrashim. You should add explanation. I'm like, but that's not the purpose of this. That will actually take this and make people not want to connect with it. But there were people that were looking to make sure, as I said, that it was more in tune and acceptable to the very broad spectrum of Judaism in America. So thinking about it from that perspective, I said, if we redo this, we should do it in a way that every corner is going to be happy and every corner can celebrate it. And it was something that we went to them and said, this is our proposal, this is our presentation, and these are the things we want to update. And they, of course, looked at it and said, oh, that's a great idea.
So from the original in 32 until the new one in 2011, so the translation was the same. So but you did mention there were different editions published. So what did that entail in those different editions? Just different covers? Were there illustrations inside? What was changed?
Their illustrations have changed, different sizes, different covers. So if you look, if anybody gets their hand on some or their photos online, there were these wood etchings. I'm holding this one now. Again, you can't see me on a podcast, but it's 1933. There were these wood etchings that are of the Arba Banim, of the four sons. They're all these different types of illustrations. There's one here of Moshe killing an Egyptian from the story. Then, it shows a picture of Moshe in the basket, coming out of the Nar. All those different things. Over the years, though, those different illustrations did get changed, and trying to make them, in some sense, more modern, because those are old. They look old. They were, as I said, wood etchings and sketches. And the version I'm holding now from the late 50s, early 60s has art that looks like the early 50s, early 60s. If you think about, think about the art on an original Monopoly board with the hand says, do not pass, go, go straight to jail, do not pass, go. That's actually here pointing to, Mora Zel, why do we eat Mora? And that's the type of illustration they did. And they would update those throughout the decades. Then the covers would change every few years, just in a sense to keep it a little bit fresh. From about 65 all the way until I said 1998, the covers were blue and white in different variations. There weren't any color on them, and we updated at that point to make it much more modern and more today. In fact, the illustrations in that version was photography. So I'm looking at it now. You have a plate here with matzah. You have korech. So we had half a sheet of machine matzah with charoses and maror on it. And for rochza, there's a picture of a nice pitcher with a bowl for people to wash. So there are. We tried to make it contemporary so that people didn't feel that the brand and the Haggadah. As we said, we want people to feel connected to this. We want it to be part of their family's heritage and Masorah. And I'm telling you, you speak to people of most any stripe, any part of Yiddishkeit, and it's even younger people. I met somebody last week who works on the Maxwell's brand. He is not ritually observant. And when he told his mother, I kid you not, this guy's in his 20s. He works at Kraft Heinz. I'm sure he went to a very good college and has a graduate degree. And he told his mother that he was moving on to the Maxwell House team. She was like all excited and he told me, he took a picture the other day. Oh, my mom has the 1940 Haggadah in the house. Like that's what people connect to when they hear their son, they're shepping Yiddish and Achas from their kid because he works for a big company, has a great job. He works on Maxwell House and they give us the Haggadah. And that's this woman's excitement for her son's job. I'm sure she's proud of other things. He's a nice guy, but that's really where the connection is. And we want it always, and that's the mindset we have with this, is whatever we do, we want it to make sure that it's the broadest use. The other thing I tell people is interesting. People say, oh, it doesn't have enough mefarshim. I use X, Y, and Z Haggadah. Great. They're also phenomenal benchers for the rest of Pesach, because you open it up. I'll tell you, this is a secret, guys. If you open the Maxwell Haggadah to the center and turn one page back, you're at benching. It's the page right before the centerfold. It's easy to find. So you go have a bunch of Haggadahs in your house, and when you're benching on Chol Hamoed or the rest of Yontif, you have an opportunity to have a bencher, and we're happy to help for that too.
Right, because it's like staple, so it opens right to the middle. One question about the picture illustration, just because a good friend of mine, Yosef Hertz, asked me this. He wants to know if the guy on the front cover has 6 fingers. It looks like a 6-fingered guy.
Okay, that is the cover, not the current cover. And in fact, this year we updated the cover. This year is the 90th anniversary, actually, of Haggadah. So the current cover, if one goes out to a supermarket, you will see it's a brand new edition. But the cover he's talking about is the one that ran from 1998 till 2010. The photo he's talking about is on the back. And I can tell you, I was at that photo shoot. That gentleman does not have 6 fingers on his hand. I did hear about this conversation from a few people a number of years ago, and I went to go look. The photo, for whatever reason, looks very interesting. We can't figure out how it happened, but he does not have 6 fingers. And it does look that way. His right hand that's holding the Haggadah there looks like there's a something, but it isn't.
Okay, so that was just wanted to clarify.
Now you need to make sure that he, that's the thing.
Okay, something else about the translation. I don't know if we mentioned. So now there's also transliteration as well, right?
Yes, there's a transliteration also. So we've always maintained that, but it's not for the entire Haggadah. It is actually for only, I would dare say, specific parts. So all of the brachos. So Kiddush is actually transliterated. Every bracha is transliterated. Holach ma'anya, manishtana. We don't transliterate all of Magid, and we don't transliterate Dayenu, but we actually no, and we don't. It's basically just specifically the brachos and a couple of, as I said, more traditional things at the very beginning. So Manishtana is there, Holach Ma'anya, and it's been something that's been carried forward for quite some time. And I will tell you, people actually do like seeing that there. So I'm looking here. It's interesting. It's something that was in the 1960s to 90s version, but it wasn't something that was there before. I think it was added because people felt that there were people, unfortunately, that were losing their ability to read Hebrew. As I said, the model Seder that I did just the other day with the Maxwell House team, there's a young woman on the team that we worked with this year, and she has a bit of a background. So I had her read the Manishtana. I always love putting them on the spot there. And she said that she would do it in Hebrew using the transliteration. But that transliteration for someone that has some background in Hebrew helps them tremendously. I've done it with people in different places, and they break their teeth if they don't really have any fluidity in Ivrit. She had some background, so when she did it in Hebrew, it sounded like you and me reading Manishtana. And there are families that like that. They like to know that somebody could do that.
Was there ever any discussion of translating into another language?
No, it's an American project. It's the product is for the United States, and the language that is most spoken here is English, of course. So it's for that market.
Gotcha. Okay, so now you mentioned before, like you published 500,000 this year. I mean, generally, what are the numbers? How many are published? Is that like the standard number, like every year?
The last few years we've been publishing in this amount. There were a couple of years where it dipped down a bit, but as I said, the high watermark we've had is about 1 million, and it depends. The demand. Depends on budget, depends on a variety of things. The client comes in, Maxwell House decides every year what we're able to do. It depends on the demand from the retailers, the supermarkets, the ShopRites, the Jewels, the Winn-Dixies, the Vons, the Ralphs, all of that, what they think they're going to need and how well they're going to distribute. It's such an interesting piece to take a look what type of excitement the stores get. And really, we find this out. I see emails that people that manage the Passover sections in these stores, it is on their list to ensure that these things are in that store. They don't want consumers and shoppers walking in trying to pick up their Pesach food and not being able to find a Haggadah.
So you mentioned the 90th anniversary is this year. Is there something? Are they doing something? Is there something special about it? Just change the cover or anything?
As I mentioned, we did update the cover. It's an entirely new, different cover for this year. It doesn't look anything like it did in the past. I wouldn't say it's more modern. We shot a Seder plate from above. It matches a little bit of the colors of the brand, just a different take. And on the back of this year's cover, it actually has a bit of history. It says that it's the 90th anniversary, and it shows other covers from the past. And it tells people a little bit about the history of the Haggadah, which we already have. If you read the inside back, the story is there. If you go to, what is this, page 58, if you're holding one, it gives a little bit of the story.
Okay, so something else, a couple of years ago, I think now you did a collaboration with Amazon on the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. They did Midget's Haggadah. It's interesting, like a pop culture crossover. Is that something that they were going to do more of? Why did they do that?
I can't say we wouldn't do more of it. It's something we would love to do. It really made sense. Again, as we said, the Haggadah has permeated into so many people's consciousness about Pesach that if you think about it, and if you know anything about the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, the show from Amazon Prime, she's the character was a quintessential, Jewish woman, traditional, on the Upper West Side of New York. And if she were a real person, her Passover Seder would certainly have entailed using a Maxwell's Haggadah. There's no doubt. So it made perfect logical sense, number one, to bring the Haggadah to that consumer. And then at the same time, let's not forget, the idea here is to sell coffee and to brand Maxwell House to the Jewish consumer. So when that Haggadah was done, it wasn't only done to get some excitement, which it certainly did, but it was also to move product. So it was only available if you bought the coffee on Amazon, different than the Haggadahs available at supermarkets. So it was a way to drive consumers to start understanding that they could buy Maxwell's coffee on Amazon Prime. And it worked. They got record numbers of new people buying coffee through Amazon that had never done it before because they wanted the Haggadah. So as much as we could talk about this and talk about it from a Svarim perspective and a Jewish community perspective, and we want to, let's understand its original purpose. The original purpose is and maintains to help build the brand. So that was where it tied in with Amazon. It took a very traditional marketing tool and a branding device and was able to make a very, very phenomenal twist to modern day e-commerce.
Okay. One other thing, just because a friend of mine just WhatsApped me another illustration question. He wants to know why the Mitzrayim can't wear shirts. He's been the most traumatizing part of the Seder seems like the Mitzrayim don't have shirts in the Maxwell Haggadah.
So that's obviously an older version because we don't have any shirtless people in the current Haggadahs. I don't know. Your friend needs to get some new Haggadahs. Let's just tell him that.
I think by the Marcus I see they don't have in here. I'm opening one by the Marcus they don't have. Mitzrayim. Was that something like
which edition are you holding there? I don't even know.
The edition that I'm holding, one of the editions that I'm holding by the Marcus, where you go to B'yod Chadams for B'yod Chazak, and you go to Dams for there when you count all the Marcus, right?
Okay, so the current version only has two frogs. So and the frogs, to be sure, don't have shirts, but that's in deference to Kermit. Because if you ever notice, Kermit also, but they're I would imagine, and again, the two versions that I personally was involved with don't have shirtless people in them. But think about it. If you were working every day out in that desert heat, really, you want to wear a shirt? It's going to get sweaty.
I don't know. Maybe that's the Egyptology of the day someone decided that was what Egyptians, ancient Egyptians.
I would imagine that is what the Egyptians wore when out. And I see what he's talking about. I'm looking at one of the older versions here. And I don't think it's the Egyptians. I think it's actually, it's a little bit of the Israelim too, because it looks like the people that are working.
I guess someone decided
the current versions do not have anybody shirtless.
This is a creative team decision. Someone just didn't. Someone just left off the shirts. Okay, yeah. Was just trying to ask a question. Okay, so now the question is for people listening to this. People, I'm sure, have them and don't have them. But today, especially, I'm sure a lot of people listening to the podcast shop in Gourmet Glatt and Bingo and Evergreen. Not to give marketing, not to give free shout outs to groceries, but whatever, Jewish grocery stores. And they can't get the Maxwell House Haggadah. So how can one get them? Is there another way?
Maxwell House Haggadah is readily available primarily in mass marketed supermarkets. So you can get them, as I've been mentioning before, in a ShopRite, in a Winn-Dixie, in a Kroger's. Most of for reasons of distribution, there's no reason for or against. And I guess in theory, some of these stores next year or in future years, if they went to the person that they get their craft products from, they could request them. They typically don't get the Haggadahs. But if you go into a typical supermarket in the Pesach aisle, I know that they're there. I've seen them already myself. They can pick them up. If one needs Haggadahs and can't find them locally, they can be obtained still for free, but to cover the plus shipping and handling costs at maxwellhousehaggadah.com. And you put in your information and you put in your credit card, and they get shipped out so that people have them if they can't find them where they live locally.
Right, and as you mentioned, people wanted older editions. Or
eBay is your friend.
Yeah, I know. I'm not sure. We'll give Israel Mizrahi a shout out. JudaicaUsed.com. My good friend Israel Mizrahi with his used farm store. I think he's had some old ones there. I'm sure. Go to eBay basically.
Yeah, if an old farm dealer has them, then that's obviously phenomenal. But I've found more typically that's where they are. People are cleaning out their houses and find them, and they It's what worked for me. You should be careful though, because people don't jump on the first one. If you're looking for one, make sure it's within the right price range. Because I've occasionally seen people try to sell like a 1940, rare, and they're selling for like $150, and they're really worth like $25. So just keep your eye out and try not to jump at the first one and say, "Oh, I want that old one." But it is. I buy some of this old stuff from other projects that we've worked on at the agency, also on eBay, and I find it usually works out very well.
Okay, so I'll put a link in the show's notes, but you said people can go to get it. And thank you very much for joining me to talk about this.
I'm going to add one thing, which I think is important, that really adds to what this Haggadah is about. So we spoke about the translation, and we spoke about what people and how people use it around their Seder table and why it's so simple. But I like to tell this to people when I have these conversations, that the Haggadah itself, as I said, is very within reach to nearly anybody in the Jewish spectrum. But I truly have a belief that without this Haggadah particularly, many, many, many homes in America would have no liturgy left at their Seder meal. There'd be no religiosity left there, because it makes it so simple to pick up a Haggadah. You go buy matzah at the supermarket, you get your wine at the supermarket, you get your chicken, your beef, whatever you need for your Seder's there, and you could pick it up. Remember that so many people in this country don't either have easy access or even know what a Judaica store is, or maybe they'll go to their temple shop and they'll buy something there, but then they got to call their rabbi and find out what they should do. This makes somebody comfortable. And if they didn't have access to these free Haggadahs, the table would end up being devoid of any really, I would dare say, religious significance in any meaningful way. Where would they get the text for Ma'anesh Tana? Where would they know how to set up a Seder plate? We're in 2022, so you could Google these things, but a lot of this would have been lost, 2 decades ago when that wasn't really a thing because they didn't have that. So I really connect the continuity of Pesach in America to this Haggadah, not necessarily vice versa, because it allowed families to know that they were being traditional without feeling like they didn't know what to do. The instruction manual is available to them in the easiest format, as we said before, without pirushim, without commentaries. It's straightforward and it's so easy to get. They didn't have to feel, oh, I got to call the rabbi again. I got to go to the temple store. I got to go find the Judaic store. I got to go to the Jewish neighborhood. You don't. You just have to go where you pick up milk. And if you buy milk and a box of matzah and you get it and a can of coffee and a free Haggadah, you can have the Seder like your grandfather did and your grandmother did. And that is, I'm telling you, a comfort that people shouldn't really walk away from so quickly, because I truly believe that otherwise it would be a Thanksgiving table for so many families if they didn't know what to do and what to say.
Yeah, and even from people. I mean, I put on my WhatsApp status that I'm doing this. Anyone have any questions? And people getting responses. All my friends, people go, everyone seems to use it. So this is, like you said, even used in the regular community. It's not just something used by not religious people or more traditional or whatever. It's used by everyone.
It goes across the bounds. I'm telling you, and it really. And that's the beauty of it. It really is, think about how many other Sfarim that people could have out there that really can get used so broadly across the spectrum and means something special in some ways to each of those segments. As I said, for maybe people that could be really learned and lumdish and really sit all night and going through the Haggadah really in darshaning, this helps them keep, as you said before, sometimes it's just great because you just want to be able to, I got to get through the next couple of paragraphs before we get to the next, it's easy. But for the people that don't have that background, they want to know that they're doing it right, and they don't want to be embarrassed that they have to go find the information. And this does that for them in such a meaningful way. And then also everybody's on the same page at the table. Everybody has it. Why don't you just digitize it? We've gotten that call. Digitize it. Everybody can sit there. And I said to someone, I said, do you really want to take an opportunity to have your family? Let's take away the halachic issues of it being maybe Pesach and, many people wouldn't use a device. Ignore that for a moment. You have a chance to have your family around the table, celebrating a holiday, a ritual, maybe just dinner. You're gonna specifically, Dafka, force them to pick up their digital device. Let's put the digital device away and pick up a paper book that everybody has the same and can be on the same page and can enjoy the moment.
Right, absolutely. So they definitely added a good point that it's definitely a very important thing. So, all right, now thank you for discussing its history and how it is now. And I'll add a link that if anyone wants to only shops in Jewish groceries, does not shop in the, like I said, a mass market grocery store, they can get a copy. And thank you once again for joining me.
Pleasure. Thanks so much, Nachi. Chag Kosher V'Smeach to everyone.